At BlueMinute, we receive a steady flow of requests from our users for help with very slow export and upload times to our cloud servers. With larger SketchUp models, the longest part of the BlueMinute upload is always the preparation and export phase, which is entirely processed on your local CPU, not the cloud server. And this part of the upload process is shown in the BlueMinute status dialog as ranging from 0 to 75%. The most time-consuming part is always due to the complexity of the SketchUp model file, an issue that equally applies to all third-party rendering systems. The next most time-consuming part is the placement of the observers throughout your model, which are used to tell the cloud server when live changes are made to your scene while the BlueMinute viewport is running, but we'll talk more about this a little later. All SketchUp scenes are made up of a large number of geometric items, and most of these items are gathered together in collections as either groups or components. The problem with groups is that if you copy a group of items around your scene, say 10 times, then you have simply increased the size and complexity for that particular group by a factor of 10. On the other hand, if you convert the same group of items to a component and copy that around 10 times, then your model file size will remain virtually unchanged. So in order to significantly minimize the processing requirements for both SketchUp and BlueMinute, you really must use components or groups converted to components before you copy them throughout your scene. So here we have an office space that has been assembled very largely by copying groups of objects and currently has a SketchUp file size of 68 megabytes. And from earlier testing, this file took 76 minutes to upload and view in BlueMinute, which is clearly much too long to wait for an upload. So what we would like to show you is an easy process for converting these same groups to components, which will shrink the file size from 68 megabytes down to 13 megabytes without any loss of detail, and reduces the BlueMinute upload time from 76 minutes down to 76 seconds. A huge saving in time for each session upload. But before we start here, there are 3 plugin tools you need to have installed, and all of these are freely downloaded from SketchUp's extension warehouse. These plugins are Cleanup, Groups to Components, and Component Replacer. So we will start here by moving our camera to get a better view of the 4 cabinets on the far wall, and select one of the cabinets and note in the Entity Info dialog this item is clearly listed as a group. Then we open up the Cleanup plugin with a shortcut key that I assigned previously. Using a fairly conservative setting of switches, Cleanup will now look for and remove any duplicate faces, hidden entities, unnecessary polygons, components, materials, etc. Now we select all 4 cabinets, and noting again in the Entity Info dialog that shows these items as 4 groups. Then we simply select the Convert Groups to Components tool from the Extensions drop-down menu, and immediately you'll see that the Entity Info dialog shows these items have now changed to 4 components. But we are not there yet, as these cabinets are now only defined as 4 different components, and most crucially, not copies of a single component. With the 4 cabinets still selected, we now call up Component Replacer from the Tools drop-down menu. Then we simply click on the cabinet component that we used a little earlier to run Cleanup on. In the Entity Info dialog, we now have 4 components, 4 in model, which means that they are now copied components of the selected cabinet, and we can now rename the definition to something more recognizable. Here we'll call it Wall Cabinet _11. And that's it. We now have 4 of these cabinets as copied instances instead of 4 unconnected groups. So now we have reduced this part of the model by at least 75%, especially after the cleanup process on the selected base cabinet. So to show this process again, we now move the camera and select the Pendant Light panel group. Then double click on the group to enter edit mode and select the nearest light. Then we run Cleanup again. And in the statistics you can see the number of faces was reduced by 60 and 3 unnecessary components were also purged. We now select all of the pendant lights again and apply groups to components. With all pendant lights still selected, we use Component Replacer and click on the light that we ran Cleanup on to instantly turn all of these lights into copies of that particular component. Now when we select a single instance of these pendant lights, the Entity Info dialog confirms there are now 30 copies of this component, and we rename the definition to Panel Light. Now we move the camera to the far side of the room and select one of the office chairs to show how we can also use subcomponents to create even more efficient scene models, if and when needed. So we start by moving our camera view to the left, select and copy move this office chair group to where we can view the process more clearly. Next we double click on the model and enter edit mode and select the 5 caster wheels. And then apply groups to components. Then we use Component Replacer to turn these 5 wheels into a copy instance of the one new caster wheel component, and taking the opportunity to rename this new component as chair wheel. For some reason the material on one of the wheels has changed to red, which is quickly corrected using the Material Sampler tool and repainting that wheel. We could also usefully change other parts to copied subcomponents, for example the armrests. But instead we will just select the entire desk chair group and use groups to component to create a new component which we will call desk chair. Now we move our camera view to allow us to select all the remaining 16 chair groups. Then we use groups to components, and then Component Replacer to turn all of the chairs into component copies of the desk chair we edited earlier. Now I'll do the same operation to the remaining copied groups in our scene, but to save time here, I will cut the video at this point and pick up again when I have completed these tasks. Okay, I have now converted all the remaining copied groups to copied component instances, and I've saved the resulting file under a different name. The final bit of model cleanup process here is to open up Model Info, then select the Statistics tab and click on the Purge Unused button to remove any other hidden elements of our scene file, and then save the file again. So now if we pull up the directory listing of where both the original and our edited files are saved, you can see the huge difference in the size of the two versions of these files, each with exactly the same visible detail, from 68 megabytes down to 13 megabytes, where not only will Bloom Unit upload much faster, but all your other SketchUp tasks will also benefit considerably from this much smaller and more efficient file size. Now the one remaining item to consider is how best to manage the placement of the observers that Bloom Unit inserts throughout your model by default and are used to tell the cloud server when live changes are made to your scene while the Bloom Unit viewport is running. In very large or complex SketchUp scenes, the time needed to place these observers can be significant, but in this example we have already considerably reduced this task due to our extensive use of components here, where observers only need to be inserted into a single instance of any component as opposed to being inserted into every copied group. However, this time can be further reduced by simply selecting any parts of the model you will not need to edit during any live Bloom Unit session and using the context menu to set these items as static. And remember that even with any items set as static, you can still copy, move, array, delete and scale them as much as you want in a live Bloom Unit session. You just won't be able to see any internal changes you have made to these items in your SketchUp model until you start a new Bloom Unit session. We should also point out that if you use any of the Bloom Unit library objects in your scene, then there are no observer or upload issues associated with those items, as the full geometric versions are already stored within the file system of the Bloom Unit cloud servers. And this feature is especially worth remembering when populating your scene with library trees or other vegetation items. Even though full management of static settings can become a little complicated, a good compromise strategy is to view your SketchUp scene and firstly identify which items in the scene that you will not need to edit in your live Bloom Unit session. If these items are made up of copied components or subcomponents, then select only a single instance of each component item, as we're doing here, and set them to static using the context menu. And for any remaining items that you will not be editing, just select them all and set those to static also. Now, after saving this new version of your scene file, we can go ahead and start our Bloom Unit session. And to prove how fast this file now uploads and starts the Bloom Unit viewport, we can view this timer. "1 minute 15 seconds, or very close to it. That was the time it took for the first of the images to come through to the Bloom Unit viewport. In the original version of this file, the same process took a full 76 minutes to reach the same point. Clearly a massive saving of close to 1 hour and 15 minutes. But to be fair here, not every SketchUp Bloom Unit file will achieve this level of improvement. For example, your file may not have sufficient proportion of copied groups or components, and cleanup might not be as effective in reducing model complexity. But in almost all the cases that our team have come across, these steps will help significantly and quite often dramatically. But please also watch out for a following movie, with a link in the notes below, to help users deal with the challenge of populating their SketchUp scenes with very large number of product models with different finishes and sizes. So in summary, the 4 easy steps to ensure the most efficient SketchUp files and the quickest Bloom Unit uploads are: 1. Use Bloom Unit library objects whenever possible. 2. Run cleanup on any imported groups or components. 3. Convert any groups to components before copying them around your scene. And 4. Set to static any part of your scene that you will not be editing in your live Bloom Unit sessions. And if you haven't tried Bloom Unit already, please visit our website at bloomunit.com for a free 14-day trial and try the steps we have described in this session. It will be worthwhile.